Liam's really sick, huh? I echoed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Right, because a romantic getaway to Hawaii, the one I've been planning for months, the one that cost me half my damn paycheck, is so inconvenient when your ex is having a sniffle. Mia winced, her perfectly manicured eyebrows furrowing in what I assumed was supposed to be remorse. Ethan, don't be like that. She sighed, her voice laced with that familiar blend of exasperation and condescension that always made me feel like I was 10 years old and had just tracked mud through her pristine white living room. He needs me. He's really important to me. Important enough to cancel a non-refundable trip to paradise, I thought, my inner monologue dripping with sarcasm. Important enough to consistently prioritize over our relationship for the past 6 months? Yeah, I'm starting to get the picture. Of course he is, I said, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. Wouldn't want to deprive the world of his sniffles. She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. It's not like I planned this, Ethan, she mumbled, fiddling with the delicate silver necklace that Liam had given her. Because apparently, matching jewelry was their thing. It's just bad timing. Bad timing? I thought, my inner monologue escalating into full-blown rant mode. Bad timing is forgetting to set the alarm. Bad timing is spilling coffee on your new white shirt. Canceling a freaking vacation because your ex is feeling a little under the weather. That's not bad timing, Mia. That's a choice. So, I said, my voice dangerously calm, let me get this straight. We're supposed to leave for Hawaii tomorrow. I've booked the flights, the resort, the romantic beachfront villa with the ridiculously overpriced cocktails. And you're telling me the night before that you're not going because Liam is sniffling? She nodded, her eyes pleading. You understand, right? He's still really important to me. Oh, I understand perfectly, I thought, the bitterness rising in my throat. I understand that I'm second place. I'm the backup plan, the convenient placeholder until Liam decides he's ready to grace you with his presence again. I understand that my feelings, my time, my money mean absolutely nothing compared to your undying devotion to your ex-boyfriend's minor ailments. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a dramatic movie-style snap, more like a quiet click. The sound of a lock finally engaging. I was done. Done with the excuses, done with the justifications, done with being the consolation prize. You know what, Mia? I said, my voice surprisingly steady. You're right. I do understand. She looked at me, her eyes searching for something. Forgiveness, perhaps? Reassurance? I didn't know, and frankly, I didn't care. I understand that I'm tired, I continued, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Tired of being second place. Tired of being the guy you call when Liam isn't available. Tired of pretending that everything is fine when it's clearly not. I stood up, grabbed my duffel bag, and started packing. So you go be with Liam, I said, not even bothering to look at her. And I'll go to Hawaii. Alone. The plane lurched, a sickening drop that sent my stomach into my throat. I gripped the armrests, my knuckles white, my eyes squeezed shut. Turbulence? More like a roller coaster designed by a sadistic engineer, I muttered, trying to inject some humor into the situation, though my voice came out as a shaky whisper. The woman next to me, a middle-aged lady with a collection of cat-themed travel pillows, let out a shriek that could have shattered glass. I offered a weak smile, hoping to convey a sense of calm that I certainly wasn't feeling. The plane bucked again, a violent shudder that rattled the overhead compartments. Screams erupted throughout the cabin, a chorus of fear and panic. I glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of the storm clouds, their dark masses swirling ominously beneath us. This wasn't exactly the relaxing flight to paradise I had envisioned, I thought, my mind trying to process the chaos unfolding around me. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, his tones strained but reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened. Easy for you to say, Captain, I thought, my body bracing for the next jolt. You're not the one about to be launched into the stratosphere. The turbulence intensified, each lurch more violent than the last. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, dangling like grotesque party favors. I fumbled with mine, my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, the impossible happened. A deafening roar ripped through the cabin. The lights flickered and died, and the plane plunged downwards, a sickening freefall that seemed to last an eternity. I braced for impact, my mind a jumble of fragmented thoughts. Mia the island, the unfinished business I'd left behind. And then, nothing. Just the roar of the ocean and the sickening crunch of metal. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the world a blur of darkness and disorientation. The salty tang of seawater filled my mouth, the cold waves lapping against my face. I coughed, sputtered, and finally managed to pull myself onto a piece of debris, clinging to it with a desperation born of survival instinct. As the initial shock subsided, I looked around, my eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. The plane, or what was left of it, was scattered across the surface of the ocean, a mangled carcass of metal and dreams. Other survivors clung to wreckage, their cries for help echoing across the waves. Turns out my romantic getaway was about to get a whole lot more adventurous. The island greeted us with a slap of reality. Waves, indifferent to our plight, deposited us on the shore like unwanted flotsam. I coughed, spluttering seawater and what I hoped wasn't a lung, and staggered onto the sand, my legs shaky, my body battered and bruised. Around me, the scene was one of utter chaos. Survivors, dazed and injured, stumbled across the beach, their cries for help mingling with the roar of the ocean. A woman with a broken arm sobbed uncontrollably. A man with a gash on his forehead wandered aimlessly, muttering to himself. A teenage girl, her face streaked with tears, clutched a tattered teddy bear. So this is it, I thought, surveying the scene with a strange detachment. Stranded on a deserted island with a bunch of strangers, no food, no water, and no Wi-Fi. Guess my survival skills are about to be put to the test. Spoiler alert, I have none. My survival kit consisted of a half-eaten bag of pretzels, a crumpled boarding pass, and a vague recollection of an episode of Survivor, where someone started a fire with a coconut and a shoelace. Not exactly promising. The initial panic was contagious. People screamed, argued, and searched frantically for loved ones. A small group huddled around the wreckage of the plane, their faces etched with despair. Others wandered off into the dense jungle, their cries fading into the dense foliage. I sat on a rock, watching the scene unfold with a strange sense of calm. The shock, I suspected, was acting as a sort of emotional anesthetic, numbing me to the full horror of the situation. Or maybe it was the realization that freaking out wasn't going to magically conjure up a rescue helicopter. Okay, Ethan, I muttered to myself. Time to assess. The island, as far as I could tell, was small, a sliver of land surrounded by an endless expanse of ocean. The beach was littered with debris from the plane, a grim reminder of our misfortune. The jungle, a wall of green, seemed to pulsate with unseen dangers. No sign of civilization, I noted. No luxury resorts, no swim-up bars, no helpful locals offering fruity cocktails. Just sand, trees, and the distinct possibility of becoming a meal for some exotic predator. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I realized I was probably suffering from some degree of shock and dehydration. Okay, priority 1, find water, I decided, stumbling to my feet. Priority 2, avoid being eaten. Priority 3, figure out how to send a strongly worded email to the airline about their unexpected turbulence policy. As I ventured into the unfamiliar terrain, the cries of the other survivors echoing behind me, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of liberation. The world I knew, the world of deadlines, bills, and relationship drama seemed a million miles away. Here on this island, the rules were different. Survival was the only currency, and I was about to learn how to play the game. As the initial shock of the crash wore off, the survivors began to coalesce into 2 distinct groups. It was like some bizarre social experiment, a microcosm of human nature under pressure. On one side were the delusional optimists. They were the ones who clung to the hope of imminent rescue, convinced that a cruise ship, a search plane, or maybe even a passing mermaid would magically appear on the horizon and whisk them away to safety. They spent their days waving frantically at the empty sky, building elaborate signal fires that mostly just produced a lot of smoke, and engaging in endless debates about the best way to attract attention. "Rescue is coming, any day now," they'd declare, their voices filled with a forced cheerfulness that couldn't quite mask the underlying fear. "We just have to stay positive." "Yeah, sure," I'd think, watching them from a distance. "And I'm expecting a visit from the Tooth Fairy." Delusional optimism is a dangerous thing in a survival situation. I'd rather face reality, however grim, than live in a fantasy world of imminent rescue. On the other side were the grim realists. They were the ones who accepted the harsh truth that we were stranded, alone, and likely to be there for a while. They focused on the practicalities of survival, finding food, building shelter, and figuring out how to make fire without the aid of a YouTube tutorial. They were the ones who, while not exactly radiating joy, had a better grasp on the situation. I gravitated towards the realists. Not because I was particularly skilled at any of the survival stuff, I wasn't, but because their approach seemed more logical. They weren't wasting precious time and energy on false hope. They were facing the situation head-on, adapting to their new reality, and figuring out how to make the best of a bad situation. Look, one of the realists, a gruff but capable man named John, had said, "We don't know how long we'll be here. Could be days, could be weeks, could be..." Well, let's not go there. The point is, we need to work together, pool our resources, and figure out how to survive. Solid plan, I'd thought, nodding in agreement. Much better than the sit around and wait for a miracle strategy. The realists weren't exactly a fun bunch. They were serious, practical, and often brutally honest about the challenges we faced. But they were also resourceful, resilient, and surprisingly supportive of each other. And in this strange new world, those qualities were far more valuable than blind optimism. So I joined their ranks, ready to face the challenges ahead, ready to learn the skills I needed to survive, ready to embrace the unexpected adventure that fate had thrown my way. Because honestly, what else could I do? Island life, it turned out, was less tropical paradise and more Lord of the Flies, with a side of sunburn. The realists, bless their practical hearts, were determined to turn us into a self-sufficient community. Which was great, in theory. In practice, it was mostly a comedy of errors, starring yours truly as the inept protagonist. Fishing. Turns out I'm better at ordering sushi than catching it. Hunting. Let's just say the local wildlife is laughing at my attempts. Shelter building. My architectural skills peaked with Lego houses. My first attempt at fishing involved a sharpened stick, a length of vine, and a healthy dose of optimism. The fish, however, were unimpressed. They seemed to find my efforts amusing, darting around my makeshift hook with mocking ease. After an hour of fruitless casting, I was ready to concede defeat and order a pizza. If only. "Maybe you're trying too hard," Natalie suggested, her voice calm and reassuring. "Just relax, feel the rhythm of the ocean, and let the fish come to you." Easy for you to say, I thought, watching her effortlessly reel in a plump fish. You're practically a mermaid. Hunting was even more disastrous. Armed with a spear fashioned from a tree branch, I ventured into the jungle, determined to bring back a feast for the group. Instead, I tripped over a root, fell headfirst into a thorny bush, and emerged looking like I'd lost a fight with a particularly aggressive cactus. The only thing I managed to catch was a glimpse of a wild boar, its beady eyes regarding me with a mixture of amusement and pity. "Maybe hunting isn't your forte," John remarked, barely suppressing a grin as I limped back to camp, my pride wounded more than my body. "Stick to gathering coconuts. You seem to have a knack for that." He's not wrong, I thought, surveying the impressive pile of coconuts I'd managed to collect. Turns out I'm a natural at climbing trees and whacking things with a stick. Shelter building was another exercise in futility. My attempts at constructing a sturdy hut resulted in a lopsided structure that looked like it was about to collapse in a gentle breeze. The other realists, bless their patient souls, eventually took pity on me and rebuilt my pathetic excuse for a dwelling, transforming it into a surprisingly cozy shelter. "You know," Natalie said, her eyes twinkling with amusement, "you're not exactly Bear Grylls, are you?" "No," I admitted, sinking gratefully onto the surprisingly comfortable bed of palm leaves. "But hey, I'm a fast learner. Give me a few more weeks and I'll be building tree houses and wrestling crocodiles. She laughed, a sound that was surprisingly melodic in the otherwise harsh environment. I'll hold you to that, she said, her eyes sparkling with a warmth that made my heart skip a beat. And as I lay there, surrounded by the sounds of the jungle, the scent of the ocean, and the comforting presence of Natalie, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this island life wasn't so bad after all. It was challenging, yes, and often frustrating, but it was also strangely liberating. I was learning new skills, facing my fears, and discovering a resilience I never knew I had. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, I was even starting to enjoy myself. Island life, it turned out, was less exotic adventure and more Groundhog Day with a side of coconut rash. The initial thrill of survival had given way to a monotonous routine, a daily grind of gathering food, maintaining shelter, and trying to avoid getting eaten by whatever lurked in the shadows. Fish, sleep, repeat. It's the island mantra, and honestly, it's less exciting than it sounds, especially when you're eating the same grilled fish every single day. I swear, I'm starting to grow gills. The days blurred into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun and the occasional squabble over who got the last mango. We'd wake up, forage for food, tend to our makeshift gardens. Turns out, I have a surprisingly green thumb. And spend the evenings huddled around the fire, sharing stories and trying to ignore the gnawing hunger that never quite went away. The realists, despite their practical approach to survival, were not immune to the petty squabbles and power struggles that seem to be an inherent part of human nature. John, with his gruff exterior and take-charge attitude, had naturally assumed a leadership role, which didn't sit well with everyone. There were grumbles about his bossy demeanor, his unfair distribution of resources, and his insistence that we all participate in the mandatory morning calisthenics, which, honestly, were more like a series of awkward stretches and groans. "Look," John would say, his voice booming across the camp, "we need to stay in shape. We don't know how long we'll be here, and we need to be ready for anything." Like what? I'd think, struggling to touch my toes. A surprise attack by a herd of yoga-loving gazelles? Then there was Sarah, a former corporate lawyer who seemed to have misplaced her chill along with her designer handbag. She was constantly criticizing John's decisions, questioning his authority, and generally being a pain in the ass. "I think we should be focusing on building a signal fire," she'd declare, her voice dripping with disdain, "not practicing our synchronized swimming routines." Because synchronized swimming is clearly the key to our survival, I'd think, rolling my eyes. The delusional optimists, meanwhile, continued to cling to their fantasies of imminent rescue. They'd spend hours scanning the horizon, their faces etched with a desperate hope that was both heartbreaking and slightly annoying. "I saw a boat," one of them would shriek, pointing excitedly at a distant cloud formation. "I'm sure it's a rescue ship." Or maybe it's just a cloud, I'd think, sighing inwardly. But hey, who am I to crush their dreams? The island was a pressure cooker, amplifying our flaws, our insecurities, our deepest fears. It was a test of our resilience, our ability to adapt, our capacity for compassion and cooperation. And honestly, some of us were passing with flying colors, while others were failing miserably. But through it all, there was a strange sense of camaraderie, a bond forged in the crucible of shared hardship. We were all in this together, for better or worse. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, this island wasn't just a place of survival. It was a place of transformation. The island had a way of crushing dreams. Not in a dramatic volcanic eruption kind of way, but in a slow, insidious erosion of hope. The endless horizon, the unchanging routine, the gnawing uncertainty of our fate, it all chipped away at our resolve, fueling a desperate desire to escape. Which led to the great raft debacle of 25, or whenever the hell we crashed, I'd lost track. Building a raft out of driftwood and vines? Brilliant idea. Said no one ever. Turns out, the ocean is not a fan of amateur boat builders. Our escape plan ended with us swimming back to shore, covered in seaweed and shame. It started with a whisper, a rumor of a distant island, a mythical land of rescue and redemption. The delusional optimists, their hope rekindled, latched onto the idea with the fervor of a drowning man clinging to a life raft. A real one, not the flimsy contraption we were about to construct. "We can do it," they declared, their eyes gleaming with a manic energy. "We just need to build a raft, gather some supplies, and set sail." Right, I thought, surveying the pile of driftwood and vines they'd collected. Because that's exactly how it works in those survival documentaries. Just tie a few sticks together, hoist a bedsheet as a sail, and off you go, conquering the high seas. John, bless his practical heart, tried to reason with them. "Look," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I understand the desire to leave, but this is dangerous. The ocean is unpredictable, the currents are strong, and we have no idea where we're going." But the delusional optimists, fueled by desperation and a healthy dose of denial, wouldn't be deterred. They spent days constructing their raft, their enthusiasm inversely proportional to their shipbuilding skills. The result was a rickety contraption that looked like it would disintegrate at the first sign of a wave. I watched their efforts with a mixture of amusement and concern. Part of me admired their determination, their refusal to give up hope. But another part of me, the part that had spent the last few months learning the hard way about the realities of survival, knew that this was a disaster waiting to happen. And a disaster it was. They set sail with a fanfare of misplaced optimism, their bedsheet sail billowing in the wind, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and excitement. I watched from the shore, my heart sinking as their flimsy raft was tossed about like a toy in a bathtub. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. A rogue wave, larger than the others, crashed over the raft, sending its occupants tumbling into the churning water. Their cries for help echoed across the waves, their dreams of escape sinking along with their makeshift vessel. The realists, myself included, sprang into action, swimming out to rescue the hapless adventurers. We dragged them back to shore, sputtering, shivering, and thoroughly humbled. "Well," John said, his voice dry, "that went well." The delusional optimists, their spirits crushed, retreated to their makeshift shelters, their dreams of escape replaced by the harsh reality of their situation. The raft, a sad testament to their misplaced optimism, lay abandoned on the beach, a reminder of the futility of their efforts. And as I watched the sun set over the vast expanse of ocean, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the realists, for their practicality, their resilience, and their willingness to face the truth, however unpleasant it might be. Because in this strange new world, those qualities were the only things keeping us afloat. Natalie was a revelation, not in a dramatic, the heavens opened and a choir of angels sang kind of way, but in a quiet, understated way that crept up on me like the tide. She was one of the realists, and naturally, her practicality and calm demeanor a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the delusional optimists. Natalie, quiet, resourceful, and surprisingly good at catching fish. Turns out, she's the island's MVP, and also kind of amazing. Not in a Mia kind of way, more of a I can actually talk to her without wanting to throw my phone into the ocean kind of way. Our initial alliance was born of necessity. We were both assigned to the fishing detail, a task that involved wading into the shallows with spears and hoping for the best. I, with my impressive lack of fishing prowess, was grateful for her expertise. She, with her quiet patience and uncanny ability to spot fish where I saw only water, seemed to tolerate my ineptitude. "You're getting better," she'd say, her voice a gentle encouragement as I flailed about with my spear, managing to impale nothing but seaweed and the occasional startled crab. "Thanks," I'd mumble, my face burning with a mixture of frustration and gratitude. "I'm still waiting for that beginner's luck to kick in." She'd smile, a subtle curve of her lips that lit up her face and made my stomach do a weird flip-flop thing. It was a smile that reached her eyes, a genuine expression of warmth and amusement that was a far cry from the practiced smiles of the social media influencers I'd encountered in my pre-island life. As the days turned into weeks, our fishing expeditions became less about survival and more about connection. We'd talk, not just about the practicalities of catching fish, but about our lives, our dreams, the things we missed about the world we'd left behind. I learned that Natalie was a writer, a journalist who had been on her way to a remote island, a real one with actual inhabitants and Wi-Fi, to write a story about endangered sea turtles. Ironic, considering her current predicament. "So," I'd said, You're basically living your own survival story now? Yeah, she'd replied, a wry smile playing on her lips. Except I didn't pack for this kind of adventure. No mosquito repellent, no sunscreen, no laptop, just a notebook and a pen. Guess I'll have to get creative. I discovered that she had a dry wit, a sharp intelligence, and a surprisingly optimistic outlook on life, despite our current circumstances. She was the kind of person who could find beauty in a sunrise, humor in a failed fishing attempt, and hope in the midst of despair. And I found myself drawn to her, not just because she was competent and kind, but because she saw me, the real me, the one who wasn't trying to impress anyone, the one who was just Ethan. We'd sit on the beach after a long day of fishing, watching the sun set over the ocean, our conversations a comfortable mix of laughter, shared experiences, and a growing sense of intimacy. I'd tell her about Mia, about the years I'd wasted chasing a relationship that was never meant to be, about the relief I felt at finally being free. She'd listen patiently, her eyes filled with understanding, her silence more comforting than any words could have been. And as the stars emerged, painting the night sky with their brilliance, I'd realized that I was falling for her, this amazing woman who had washed up on the same shore, this unexpected companion who was slowly but surely stealing my heart. The island, in its cruel and unusual way, had become a love story setting. Not the kind with candlelit dinners and rose petals, but the kind forged in shared hardship, whispered confessions under a canopy of stars, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone had your back, even if that someone was also terrible at starting a fire with sticks. Mia was the past, Natalie was the present. And honestly, the present was looking pretty damn good. Turns out, surviving a plane crash and building a life from scratch is surprisingly romantic. Who knew? It started with stolen glances across the campfire, a shared laugh over a particularly disastrous attempt at baking breadfruit, a casual touch that lingered a little too long. We were drawn to each other, not just as allies in survival, but as two souls who recognized something familiar in the other, a shared sense of humor, a quiet understanding that transcended words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a riot of colors that would have made a postcard jealous, I found myself confessing my feelings. We were sitting on the beach, the waves lapping gently at our feet, the air filled with the scent of salt and something subtly floral that I couldn't quite place. "Natalie," I began, my voice a little shaky. She turned to me, her eyes, the color of the twilight sky, searching mine. "Yes, Ethan. I stumbled over the words, suddenly feeling like a teenager confessing his first crush. I think I'm falling for you." She smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. "I think I'm falling for you too, Ethan." And that was it. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just a simple acknowledgement of a connection that had been growing stronger with every shared sunrise, every successful fishing expedition, every whispered conversation under the starlit sky. Our relationship was a stark contrast to my past with Mia. There were no games, no insecurities, no constant comparisons to an ex who loomed like a shadow over our relationship. With Natalie, it was easy, effortless, a comfortable companionship that deepened into something more profound with every passing day. We built a life together, a simple life, but a fulfilling one. We shared the chores, the triumphs, the frustrations. We learned to rely on each other, to trust each other, to support each other through the challenges that island life threw our way. We explored the island, discovering hidden coves, waterfalls, and a surprisingly diverse population of birds that seemed to enjoy mocking our attempts at birdwatching. We built a new shelter, a sturdier one this time, with a thatched roof and a surprisingly comfortable hammock. We even managed to cultivate a small garden, our crops a testament to our growing skills and our shared determination to thrive in this unexpected paradise. And as the months turned into years, I realized that I had found something truly special, something I had never experienced before, a love that was genuine, a connection that was deep and unwavering, a sense of belonging that transcended the boundaries of our island existence. Mia, with her insecurities and her inability to commit, was a distant memory, a fading echo of a life I had left behind. Natalie, with her quiet strength, her unwavering support, and her genuine affection, was my present, my future, my everything. And as I lay beside her under the starlit sky, her hand clasped in mine, I knew that I had found my home, not in a place, but in a person. And that, I realized, was the greatest adventure of all. Time on the island was a river. It flowed differently here, not in the rigid, measured ticks of a clock, but in the ebb and flow of tides, the cycles of the moon, the slow, steady growth of the trees. Years had passed. I knew this, not by counting the days, but by the lines etched on Natalie's face when she smiled, by the way the palms we'd planted had grown taller than our shelter, by the comfortable rhythm of our lives. Years have passed. The island is no longer a prison. It's home, the ocean, the trees, the stars. They're my family now. And Natalie, she's my everything. The island, once a symbol of my isolation, had become my sanctuary. The initial fear, the desperation to escape, had faded, replaced by a grudging acceptance, then a quiet contentment, and finally, a deep sense of belonging. The ocean, once a terrifying expanse that had swallowed my past, was now a source of sustenance, a constant companion. I knew its moods, its rhythms, the way it whispered secrets in the dead of night. I could navigate its currents, predict its tides, and coax its bounty into my fishing net. The trees, once a menacing wall of green, were now familiar friends, their branches offering shade from the relentless sun, their leaves rustling with stories whispered on the wind. I knew which ones bore the sweetest fruit, which ones offered the strongest wood for building, which ones harbored the shy creatures that had become our companions. The stars, once indifferent pinpricks in the vastness of space, were now my nightly confidants, their constellations tracing patterns of memory and hope across the canvas of the night sky. I knew their names, their stories, the way they guided us through the darkness, reminding us that we were not alone. And Natalie was the heart of it all. She was the laughter that filled our days, the warmth that chased away the loneliness of the nights, the strength that helped me weather the storms, both literal and metaphorical. We had built a life together, a life that was simple, yet profound. We had learned to live in harmony with the island, to respect its rhythms, to appreciate its gifts. We had faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and emerged stronger, our bond forged in the crucible of shared experience. We were no longer the people we had been when we crashed on this shore. The island had stripped away the layers of pretense, the anxieties, the expectations of the world we had left behind. It had revealed our true selves, the core of who we were, the people we were meant to be. And as I looked at Natalie, her hand clasped in mine, her eyes reflecting the firelight, I knew that I had found my home, not in a place, but in a person. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift the island could have given me. Paradise, even a makeshift one cobbled together from wreckage and salvaged dreams, has a shelf life. The initial camaraderie, the "we're all in this together" spirit, had started to curdle. Turns out, even when stripped of the trappings of civilization, humans are still, well, human. Turns out, even on a deserted island, there are jerks. These guys decided that hoarding all the coconuts and bossing everyone around was a good idea. I beg to differ. It started subtly. A few snide remarks about who was doing more work, a subtle hoarding of the best fishing spots, a growing resentment towards John's leadership. And then it escalated. A faction emerged, led by a guy named Mark, a former stockbroker who apparently believed that survival of the fittest meant whoever had the biggest biceps and the loudest voice. He and his cronies, a motley crew of disgruntled delusional optimists and wannabe alpha males, decided that the island's meager resources were theirs for the taking. They staked their claim on the best fishing spots, hoarding the catch for themselves. They raided the communal garden, leaving the rest of us with scraps. And they instituted a new rule, mandatory tribute. Every survivor was expected to offer a portion of their daily findings to Mark and his crew, or face the consequences. Consequences? I'd scoffed. when Mark's second-in-command, a muscle-bound guy with the IQ of a sea sponge, informed me of the new regime. "What are you going to do? Banish me to the other side of the island? Oh, the horror." He glared at me, his fists clenched. "Don't push it, Hayes," he growled. "Mark's in charge now. You do what he says or you'll regret it." Right, I thought, watching them strut around like they owned the place, because nothing says leadership like stealing coconuts and threatening people with a pointy stick. Natalie, ever the voice of reason, tried to mediate. "This isn't the way," she'd argue, her voice calm but firm. "We need to work together, not against each other. Dividing ourselves will only weaken us." But Mark and his crew weren't interested in reason. They were drunk on power, their egos inflated by their newfound control. They saw themselves as the island's elite, the rightful rulers of this forgotten corner of the world. And as I watched them bully the weaker survivors, hoard the resources, and generally act like entitled jerks, I felt a familiar anger rising within me. It was the same anger I'd felt towards Mia, towards the world that had always seemed to favor the loud, the aggressive, the ones who took what they wanted without regard for others. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. This time, I had something to fight for, a community, a home, a woman I loved. And I wasn't about to let a bunch of power-hungry bullies destroy it. It was time for a revolution. The revolution, island style, was less about storming the Bastille and more about strategic coconut deployment. Natalie, bless her brilliant mind, had devised a plan that was as cunning as it was hilarious. "Time for a revolution," I'd whispered, my eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Natalie and I, armed with nothing but our wits and a few strategically placed coconuts, took on the island bullies. And won. Because turns out, teamwork makes the dream work. Even when the dream is just don't get eaten by a wild boar. Our first move was to rally the troops. We gathered the other realists, the ones who were tired of Mark's tyranny, the ones who still believed in fairness and cooperation. John, despite his initial reluctance to challenge Mark's authority, eventually agreed to join our cause. "All right," he'd said, his voice gruff but determined. "Let's show these bullies what happens when they mess with the wrong people." Our strategy was simple: distraction and disarray. While Natalie and a few others created a diversion, drawing Mark and his cronies away from their camp with a series of well-placed noises and strategically lit fires, John and I, armed with our trusty coconuts, would infiltrate their stronghold and reclaim the stolen resources. The plan, miraculously, worked. Mark and his goons, their egos inflated and their senses dulled by their ill-gotten gains, fell for our ruse. They charged off into the jungle, their shouts of rage echoing through the trees, leaving their camp unguarded. John and I, with the stealth of seasoned ninjas, or at least as stealthy as one can be while carrying a sack of coconuts, crept into their camp. We gathered the stolen fish, the pilfered mangoes, the precious stash of fire-starting supplies. And then, for good measure, we rearranged their sleeping arrangements, replacing their comfy palm leaf beds with a collection of prickly bushes and strategically placed rocks. By the time Mark and his crew returned, empty-handed and thoroughly frustrated, their camp was in disarray, their stolen goods gone, and their sleeping quarters decidedly less comfortable. Their expressions, a mixture of confusion, anger, and grudging respect, were priceless. All right, Mark grumbled, his bravado considerably diminished. "You win this round, Hayes, but this isn't over." "Oh, I think it is," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "The island isn't big enough for two leaders, and you, my friend, have just been voted off." The other survivors, emboldened by our success, cheered their agreement. Mark and his cronies, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, slunk away, their reign of terror over. Peace, or at least a semblance of it, was restored to the island. The stolen resources were redistributed, the fishing spots were shared, and the mandatory tribute was abolished. John, his authority reaffirmed, resumed his leadership role, though with a newfound respect for the power of strategic coconut warfare. And as I stood beside Natalie, our hands clasped, our faces flushed with victory, I realized that we had done more than just reclaim the island. We had created a community A society built on fairness, cooperation, and the occasional well-aimed coconut. And that, I knew, was a victory worth celebrating. The ship appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a shimmering white beacon against the endless blue. A collective gasp went through the camp, a wave of disbelief, then joy, then a strange, unsettling confusion. A ship! Finally, rescue! The cry went up, echoing across the beach, a mixture of elation and disbelief. Years of waiting, of hoping, of clinging to the faintest glimmer of possibility. It was finally happening. Or was it? Turns out, leaving the island was a lot more complicated than I thought. This was my home now. These were my people. And Natalie? She's my everything. The initial euphoria quickly gave way to a more complex reality. The ship, a research vessel that had strayed off course, was not there to rescue us. They had limited supplies, limited space, and a mission of their own. They could only take a few of us. The news hit the camp like a bucket of cold water. The delusional optimists, their hopes dashed once again, descended into despair. The realists, ever practical, started assessing their options, weighing the pros and cons of returning to a world they barely remembered. And me? I was conflicted. The thought of leaving the island, of returning to civilization, had once been my driving force, the fuel that kept me going through the darkest days. But now, standing on the shore, watching the ship bobbing gently on the horizon, I felt a strange reluctance, a pull towards the familiar, the comfortable, the life I had built here. This island, this harsh, unforgiving paradise had become my home. The ocean, the trees, the stars. They were my landscape, my companions, my family, and Natalie. Natalie was my anchor, my love, my reason for being.